Good morning. I'm Brian Reagan. This is.
Tyler Kelly.
And today we close out the book of Esther, even though there's a couple more chapters. We're going to close it out with verses 1 through 8 of chapter 8.
On that day, King Ahasuerus gave Queen Esther the house of Haman, the enemy of the Jews. And Mordecai came before the king, for Esther had told how he was related to her. So the king took off his signet ring, which he had taken from Haman, and gave it to Mordecai. And Esther appointed Mordecai over the house of Haman. Now Esther spoke again to the king, fell down at his feet, and implored him with tears to counteract the evil of Haman the Agagite, and the scheme which he had devised against the Jews. And the king held out the golden scepter towards Esther. So Esther arose and stood before the king, and said, If it pleases the king, and if I have found favor in his sight, and the thing seems right to the king that I am pleasing in his eyes, let it be written to revoke the letters devised by Haman the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, which he wrote to annihilate the Jews who were in all the king's provinces. For how can I endure to see the evil that will come to my people, or how can I endure to see the destruction of my countrymen? Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther and Mordecai the Jew, Indeed, I have given Esther the house of Haman, and they have hanged him on the gallows because he tried to lay his hands on the Jews. You yourselves write a decree concerning the Jews as you please in the king's name, and seal it with the king's signet ring. For whatever is written in the king's name and sealed with the king's ring, no one can revoke.
All right. So, and this is the other part of your answer, Tyler. You remember when they started America, the designation of a vice president? What was the debate about? Do you remember?
Who succeeds?
Okay, that's what it became. It became a having a backup in the event something happened to the president, that we wouldn't have to have the elections and blah, 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 that it was a successor to be able to assume that office. But the early debates about a vice president was that he had the full authority and power of the president to act as the president in conjunction with the president, so that the president would not bear the burden of the office all by himself. And he said, why would you say it? Because who had the signet ring of the empire? Haman did. So once he ran it by the king and it sounded good, the final wording and everything, it gets stamped with it. And so the because we are very borderline totalitarian in our government style, governors, presidents are really just a quarter bubble off from being able to assume dictatorial power in any state or in our nation. This thing that a man would be the head of an empire and unquestionable in his authority, but he's got a ring made that someone else can just sit there and is a little bit baffling to us. But that was how it was done. The book of Daniel had a signet. Joseph in Egypt with Pharaoh had a signet. And so what will the undoing be? They will write a law, because they can't undo the law for everyone throughout all the provinces to kill all the Jews. That law stands, because he said what? It can't be revoked. And the king's like, I don't know how to word this thing. Y'all are the Jew people. Y'all figure it out. I'm going to go back and do kingly stuff. Sit in my court and have people dance and drink wine and cut business deals and treaties and think about who I want to go to war with next. Y'all figure it out. And the plan that they came up with was actually kind of an ingenious plan. That every Jew was to arm themselves to the teeth, and that anyone who tried to come against them to kill them, they could kill them in self-defense, and no one had any legal right of recourse. And for the most part, there's like one notable exception, and it went really bad for them. For the most part, once everybody realized that the people that they were going to butcher that day were all armed to the teeth and had equal power to fight back, guess what happened, Tyler?
It didn't go.
It didn't go. So now I'm going to make my point. Plato, not Play-Doh, but Plato, once said that good people don't need laws to govern them, and bad people find ways to get around the laws to circumvent them and break them anyways. We have all kinds of laws in America, and a lot of them are contradictory. But the founders, who were Bible people, they had read where in the days of Saul and Jonathan, the only two guys that had swords were Saul and Jonathan, because the Philistines had disarmed the nation of Israel. When David becomes king, when Solomon becomes king, Solomon will make sure, and David will make sure, that there's more swords than there are people in the country, because they want everyone to be able to be armed to the teeth in the event that conflict comes. Here, the Jews weren't armed, so they pass a law that says every Jew has to arm themselves to the teeth. It is a biblical principle for people in any land in which they live to be armed for their own protection and defense against enemies, foreign and domestic. Because the enemies to the Jews were their own countrymen. Ethnically, the Jews are a people at this time in the Persian Empire. They've been there by Esther's time for over a century, the ones that this is applying to. So please don't come to me and say that it's not a godly principle that people should be armed to the teeth and have the ability to defend themselves, foreign and domestically, against attackers and invaders and people who would destroy the way of life for the godly. We do not fight our battles against flesh and blood. But in the event flesh and blood decides to go that direction, you need to be able to exercise some basic self-defense. So, just so we're clear, this message is not endorsed by anyone in the Lake Butler Church of Christ. This is Brother Brian, a Christian, applying a passage of Scripture, and it just so happens I'm being allowed to use this medium through the church's webpage and Facebook and YouTube. With that, I'm Brian Reagan. This is
Tyler Kelly.
We invite you to come back tonight at
7 o'clock for our evening worship service and Bible class at Lake Butler Church of Christ in Lake Butler, Florida, either on our live stream or in person.
till then.